Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Masculine Wilderness Podcast. I'm your host, Tom Perez. I'm the founder and CEO of Epic Project. This podcast is an ongoing conversation really about how men can show up as the best version of themselves in this world. And one of the best versions of men that I've had the privilege of being around in Epic is my friend Isaac McKeithen from Southern California. Isaac, welcome. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get into how our paths crossed. And I want to pick your brain on a few things.
Well, hi, everyone. I'm Isaac McKeithen. I'm actually a transplant to Southern California, originally from Central Florida. Moved out here in 2015 and actually been kind of growing on me to be a California guy now.
No, oh, you just said that publicly.
Yes, yeah. I'm officially an OC California guy, but that's I love awesome. It. And so, yeah, I actually met my wife out here and things have been great. We've been married for 6 years now. We have 2 sons, and God just called me to actually do something a little different with life. And I've been a martial arts instructor for 25 years and been in the arts themselves for almost 30. And that's not what he called me to do out here in California. It was to get involved in the anti-human trafficking movement in Southern California. And that truly is where it all began.
That's where our paths crossed. How old are your sons?
My oldest turned 30 September 12th.
Dude, you're
and
old.
My youngest will be 19 on January.
Yeah. Are they in Southern California? Or are they?
Yeah, they're out? both here in Southern California.
Okay. That's great. Well, so Isaac, for those that are listening, Isaac is one of our main volunteer leaders in Epic Project, and he has been building and leading and supporting teams really throughout Southern California since, when did we first connect? 2019. Okay, since 2019. So tell us how our paths crossed.
Oh, that's a very interesting story. Our paths actually crossed. I was in transition from being the coordinator of men standing against trafficking here in Southern California. Our human trafficking ministry here at my church at Saddleback was actually transitioning from street outreach to more of survivor outreach, during basically focusing on providing for survivors and training and things like that. And our men standing against trafficking section of that ministry was kind of, the volunteers were falling off. And I was called one day by one of the ministry leaders who had spoken to Tom. And she said, "There's someone I want you to talk to. He has a very interesting project I think you would be interested in." And I said, "Sure. Where are we going to meet?" She said, "Well, are you available in 2 hours?" I was like, "Yeah." And she said, "Well, he asked if you could meet him at Starbucks in Anaheim." And we went from there. And
Yeah, a Starbucks near a freeway. There can't be too many of those in Southern California.
Right.
Yeah. I don't remember like the details of that conversation, but what I remember when we met was like, I think some people would look at you and go, there's a powerful man, just your presence, your personality, all of those things. But my impression was there's a guy that has just a real genuine strength about you. Like, you're not one of those guys that has to take command of a room or a space, but if need be, you will. And I've watched you do that over and over again. Tell us a little bit about I'm curious about like where some of that comes from. I want to know about your career, and there's military in that story as well, right? Give us a little bit of that biographical background, professionally, what you've done, your service in the military, like what different hats did you wear over your, may I say, just perfectly shaped head? I'm really jealous. When I first met you, I do remember that. Like, it's got this perfectly shaped bald head, which is majestic. So sorry, I'm just going all fanboy on you, but tell us about the different hats you wore just professionally over the years.
Well, I will first give credit to my high school teacher, Mrs. Fritz. She refused to allow me to accept being average.
Oh, wow.
Yes. She seen potential in me and she pushed me all through high school. I could never just turn in an average paper. She always gave it back. So I definitely take my hat off to her, really, truly pushing me. And then when I told her I was going into the military after high school, she was like really proud because I told her I just didn't see college. I knew I had the potential to be in school, but I didn't have the discipline to be at school. And I needed somebody to basically guide me and steer me in the right direction.
Yeah.
So I joined the Army back in 90.
Wow.
And that actually was right before the Gulf War kicked off.
That's right.
Desert Storm.
Yeah.
So that became interesting.
Were you deployed during that then?
Well, my first actually duty station was overseas. I was stationed in Germany.
Wow.
Yeah, and I was actually, when I got done with all my training, was lined up to go to Iraq. But good thing is Kuwait was winding down right at the time that we were getting our orders, and I was getting to Germany to my unit. They were actually given orders to come back to Germany. So it was a blessing in disguise. It wasn't enough for me to be actually in Iraq and Kuwait dealing with that. It's better to be in Germany providing security back at home.
Yeah.
You know.
What was you talked about needing that structure, and obviously Mrs. Fritz affirmed that for you. What was it about the structure and the discipline that really helped you grow and thrive as a man?
It was actually Sergeant Jones, as staff sergeant. He was my drill sergeant.
I'm imagining these characters now that are getting introduced in your story. All right, so from Mrs. Fritz to Sergeant Jones. Continue.
Yeah, Drill Sergeant Jones. He was a stern drill sergeant, but he was actually very fair. I was one of his squad leaders, and I actually asked him why. I said, why me? I'm just here to do my time, get through training, and get to my unit. He was like, because every time we're doing any kind of punishment, you're smiling, no matter what it is, whether it's grass drills or push-ups or running till you can't run anymore. You always got a smile on your face. I was like, Drill Sergeant, you're not doing anything that my coach Castle, my football coach for 4 years, didn't do to me.
Wow.
So I guess I was prepared for whatever you was going to throw at me, and jokes that are told in basic training and the building up, but they have to tear you down to make you a soldier.
Yeah.
Was really inspiring, but it was also not something I wasn't exposed to, because all my coaches had already done that. They had already talked down to you and then built you back up.
Yeah.
So it was just another team to me.
What position did you play in high school?
Running back.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, we'll play running back.
Yeah. Yeah. So Mrs. Fritz, Drill Sergeant Jones, and Coach, I forget.
Coach Castle. He actually coached for 52 years in high school.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, he coached my dad, myself, and my brother.
Oh, my goodness. So these, I love these characters in the story. What else about Drill Sergeant Jones was positive, informative for you?
What really stood out was the fact that they gave him the worst of the worst. We were the misfit crew. We were actually not even supposed to graduate. There were actually deals, backdoor deals and bets made on the fact that his platoon, his entire company, only 40% of us was going to graduate.
Oh, wow.
And he failed to encompass that. I mean, he trained us hard, he trained us long, but he also praised us when we all came together, because he had a talk with us leaders, his squad leaders, the platoon leader. He pulled us into his office and he actually told us, he said, they're betting on y'all not finishing. I'm betting on y'all leading these guys to the promise.
Wow.
I'm betting on all of them getting the graduation, but I'm going to need you to do that. And so we all just looked at each other and was like, well, he picked us, and we were some misfit leaders. I mean, I was from Florida. We had a guy from Texas and Louisiana. Our platoon leader was from Seattle. So it was a group that he just put together, and he had faith in us. So after the 8 weeks, throughout the 8 weeks, we all just, our faith in each other grew, and we leaned on each other, and we carried each other through. And we actually graduated with honors after basic training.
Oh, wow. And you would attribute that to his faith in you. Like, he saw that in you. I can definitely, this is the first time I've heard the details of this part of your story, but man, it's just so consistent with who I know you to be just in our work together. That's such a vivid picture. So your service, was it just 4 years, or did it go longer?
It was 4 years in the Army, and then it was time to go.
Okay.
Yes. I got to the end of my enlistment. I had two choices, and neither choice was mine. I didn't want to go to overseas to Korea, and I did not want to go into a special forces unit. So those were the two options they gave me. I said, well, actually, I have one more choice, and that's to go back to Florida. And I chose to end my enlistment and get out after my 4 years, and was honorably discharged. And as that ended, my railroad career began. And that was kind of out of nowhere, because I had never, ever thought about trains. I had never played around trains. I never even looked at trains.
Wow. So how did this become a possibility for you?
Well, ironically, I filled out an application for the railroad CSX in Florida. And I just filled it out because they were looking to hire, and they were hiring for locomotive engineers. But I wanted to be a law enforcement. I actually wanted to be a Florida state trooper. And I was actually in the lieutenant's office doing an interview, and CSX called up and asked me, could I take a physical? And I asked him, could I take a break? And I went out and I asked them, I said, so how many times I will have to go to Miami? Because Miami was a breaking deal. Law enforcement, the state troopers was offering my first 2 years, it was going to be in Miami.
Oh.
So the railroad said, well, you might go down there 3, maybe 4 times at max a year. And then they told me the salary, and the lieutenant told me the salary, and I was like, sorry, sir, I'm going to have to.
I got a train to catch.
Yeah, I'm going to have to excuse myself from this. I've got to go take a drug test for the railroad.
Yeah.
And it went from there.
Yeah. So what was your work like with the railroad? Because that was your primary career, right?
Yes. So I worked on the railroad for 21 years. And that was a learning experience, to learn something you've never done, even thought about.
Yeah. What was it, if anything, that translated from your Army experience into this job setting? Were there things that you were able to leverage from what you learned in the Army?
Yes. The ability to work with different people from different backgrounds and different parts of the country, to now working in Central Florida with people who had been on the railroad and learning to work around different people who now, like, for instance, my class that I hired with, I was the only person in that entire 9 group, the 9 guys I hired with. I was the only one that didn't have a relative on the railroad.
Oh, wow.
Which was quite unique, because the first question everybody kept asking me is how you got here. And I was like, well, I have the biggest uncle out of everybody here.
Wow.
I said, Uncle Sam, that's how I got here.
Yeah, that's true. What was the nature of the job with the railroad? Or I'm sure there were multiple things that you were involved in during your career there.
Yeah, I started as a conductor, which was actually working around the trains, building them, separating them, and that kind of thing. And then became a locomotive engineer, which that was a fun job. The actual driving of the train is...
Yeah, that's a lot of horsepower.
That's one job that I've always treasured. There's something to be said to be able to control 10,000 tons and stop it exactly where you want it.
Well, wait, 10,000 tons.
Yes, 10,000 tons, not pounds.
Not pounds.
That's 10,000 tons.
Man, that's a lot of weight. Yeah, what did it feel like the first time you sat behind the controls, like when you start to accelerate? That's a lot of power.
That was an adrenaline rush.
Yeah.
To actually get it moving.
Yeah.
But the humbleness came fast because my first inaugural trip by myself after training, I actually did not have all of my brakes.
Oh, gosh.
So, yes, now I have to learn how to stop 147 cars with only a limited amount of braking. So that I learned to listen to my conductor at the time. He had 35 years of experience. And I had only had, at that time, I'd only had 2.
And you were in charge.
Yes, I was the one driving.
Wow.
But he coached me how to come off a hill and actually get the train stopped. And he looked over and he said, "You listen well." I said, "I like living."
I mean, the thread is still there. It's just that teamwork and coordination. Yes. Yeah. What was within your career there, was it being the engineer that was the most fun?
The most fun was as a locomotive engineer instructor to train someone on your craft and actually see the moment when they have that aha, when it actually clicks in their mind, they get it.
Yeah.
That was the most rewarding part because the training itself was stressful. The training was 4 months of all day in the books. They had to go home and study. We as instructors had to study because we were teaching experienced people who had anywhere from 5 to 10 years on the railroad as a conductor. But now we have to actually transition them into being an engineer.
Yeah.
So that was the most rewarding position that I held.
Yeah, I wondered too if there wasn't some unlearning that some of the students had to go through when you started teaching them. Do you ever feel like that they had acquired bad habits along the way that you had to correct?
Yes, there were a lot of habits. We told them from day one that this is not going to be like, I'm sure the engineers have showed you that you've worked with. They've gave you some pointers, but this is not going to be that training. So everything that they giving you, I need you to put it in a file cabinet. I don't want you to throw it away, but I do need you to save it for the next 4 months.
Yeah.
So when you go back after this training and you start your on-the-job training with those engineers as your trainers, now you can take it out.
Yeah.
But while you're here, we need you to pay attention to the instructions we're giving you, the knowledge, the book knowledge that we're going to give you, and the best practices that we're handing you.
Yeah. So there's discipline, there's teamwork, there's training, teaching. What happened after your railroad career? Where did it go from there?
It went back to civil service. I actually, after 21 years, being working as what we call the crafts and also management on the railroad, I went to the federal government and now working as a railroad safety inspector was a unique transition because I'm now have to be the subject matter expert. That's what I'm looked to as.
Yeah.
With any property that I walk onto, that actually forced me to do one of the things that I can do. I don't like doing it, but studying, learning how to be the person that they could come to and rely on for correct information.
Yeah.
That's
what you're currently doing.
Actually, currently, no.
Okay.
I'm currently a railroad safety specialist.
Okay.
And I transitioned from being an inspector to now being a person that can talk to the railroads. We're like a liaison between the agency and the railroads.
Would you be part of the response if there was an accident? Do you do anything investigative when it comes to? I have a very personal connection with just the story you're telling me about the railroad, not because I ever did it, but my mom's dad worked I think they call it the switching yard for the Chicago Transit Authority. So all the commuter trains in and out of Chicago. And he was the one that sat up in the little crow's nest and put trains on tracks. So he did that. And then my dad's father was by training a diesel locomotive engineer, and he built diesel locomotives. And he worked for a giant sugar mill in rural Cuba because the way they harvested the sugar cane is they had these little spurs, little rail lines that go out in the field. They'd load up the train and bring it into the mill. So my grandfather was part of that. So I had grown up, and we lived close enough to the junction of a north-south and an east-west Burlington Northern lines. And so every day, every morning, especially because it's a little quieter, I can hear the trains rumbling out, going north or headed east. And it's such a comforting thing for me, just personally. But what I've always been fascinated by is you have this unbelievable amount of raw power, right? That is contained and directed in a really purposeful way. And you probably know where I'm going with this, but like we talk at Epic about strength versus power, and strength is disciplined. And like, it's so cool to hear you unpack your story. Like you learned that early on. How much horsepower is there in a single diesel locomotive?
Oh, well, those vary. You can have one as light as they use in the passenger world, where it's like maybe 2,000 horsepower, all the way up to the newer freight locomotives are pushing 4,800 horsepower.
Horsepower, yeah. And
so it's just really a matter of, are we building it for speed like we use in the passenger world, or are we building it for strength and longevity as we use in the freight world?
And you'll see, we've all seen them, the big long freight trains with multiple engines. That's just a lot of power. What has always impressed me about you, and I want to talk about like our work a little bit now too, is you bring a strength to this work that is, it just communicates, like hearing you tell your story about how people have influenced you. I've seen you do that with other men, and like you teach them, you train them, you encourage them, you hold them accountable. Like this is just, it's so much a part of who you are now, like in your work with Epic and in dealing with human trafficking. Are you aware that you're bringing all of those skills into that environment as well?
Actually, no, I wasn't consciously aware of it. It's
just who you are.
Yeah, it's just the way I do business, really, or how I present or teach a class, especially now that I've, the past year, been teaching human trafficking awareness. It's been something that has really been rewarding, again, to see people receiving the information and they get it. Yeah. They fully understand what you're trying to do.
What was your first experience that caused you to go, I feel like maybe I'm called to be involved in this work? What was it that precipitated that for you?
It was actually being on a outreach team in Southern California as security when I first got here.
So what were they doing that you were providing security for?
They were actually out talking with victims, saying if they were ready to come out of the life.
Okay.
And that really was a compelling, convicting moment. What I mean by that is, it's like God pulled back the veil and said, this is what my children are actually going through.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I never have forgotten that picture, that view.
Was this in Los Angeles or Orange County, or?
It was actually in Orange County. It was in Santa Ana. And it was on one of their oldest locations, This was out on the street. Out on the street.
Yeah.
One of their oldest locations that has now been transformed and shut down. Mm. But being out there, seeing the strength of the outreach team actually being out at midnight, willing to risk their lives to have this conversation And what I was responsible for was other people's lives, making sure they were safe.
Yeah.
But also kind of taking note to the type of men that were coming, that we were seeing.
Yeah.
And that really kind of broke my heart too.
What was it about the men that you were saying that broke your heart?
You could see the lostness in their eyes when periodically you would lock eyes with them. They don't want to look at you, but they have no choice but look at you because they're pulling up to talk to a girl.
Yeah.
And you lock eyes with them for that split moment, and you could see the lostness behind them.
Yeah. So this is on a street corner in Santa Ana at nighttime, and was it just like a line of cars just circling and driving around?
Oh, yeah. There was 50 to 60 cars a night just lined up. Like you're going through a fast food restaurant.
Yeah.
Really.
I've heard it described that way by other folks. Yeah. I was invited, and it might have been on the trip when you and I met, might have been before, but I was invited by the LA County Sheriff's Department to go with them on a mission in Compton. And it was a big deal, a multiple agency, and the Sheriff's Department was heading it. And I was with the commander in his unmarked vehicle. And we were about a block away from an undercover officer, a woman who was on the corner, and she was mic'd up and we could hear it. But I what I remember that struck me so powerfully about that scene, and this is on a Compton Avenue, I think maybe in Compton. And if you know anything about Southern California, it's real down there.
Yes.
And so I'm looking at this young woman, and she was tiny. And I said to the commander, I said, man, she just looks so vulnerable. And he goes, well, okay, I want you to look at that car. He points out all these cars, unmarked cars, literally within 10 seconds of the girl. I said, there are more than a dozen armed undercover officers in these cars in case anything went wrong. Like, even when I knew that, she still looked vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
And then I imagined someone who wasn't an undercover officer, someone who had no choice but to be out there. And yeah, just like it broke my heart, what you were saying. You were with, or we were with you during I believe the Super Bowl when it was in LA too, right? You were part of,
yes.
Were you? Yeah. So Figueroa Avenue.
Oh.
Right. Describe that. Describe that scene, because that's Santa Ana, like on steroids from what I've heard.
Yes, Figueroa is it is for anyone, and I often tell my volunteers here, Figueroa is where you will find out if you are truly called to do this work, the anti-human trafficking work, because there is nothing but heartbreak. It is heartbreak to see the girls, how young they are to how old they are, but also to see these young boys that are being forced to be runners. And they're out there at 1 and 2 in the morning trying to search for girls to get money to take back to the trafficker.
To the traffickers. Can you describe the scene like that? And Justin, our program director, he was with you guys and a bunch of our other guys, but I think it was one particular night where the side streets were all just jammed up with guys waiting to get in line.
Yeah, so the scene on Figueroa is one of, you have a major 4-lane highway and you have businesses and houses on both sides. But like you stated, all of the side streets starting at roughly about 10 o'clock become filled with lines of cars with guys that are just waiting their turn to pull up to Figueroa, to drive down, to find someone that they want to get services from that night. And if we're talking 20 streets when you include both sides, it was just one of these things that is, you kind of have to see it because you believe it's a movie scene from like Escape LA or a horror movie, really. Yeah. But it's like a nightmare that never ends.
Yeah.
And you really, when you're down there, like when we were down there, we couldn't believe what we were actually seeing, how young the victims were, but also how blazing the traffickers were. and how uncaring the buyers are. And to see law enforcement basically with their hands tied because they're overwhelmed.
Yeah.
I mean, you see 2 or 3 patrol cars drive down Figueroa, but they're outnumbered by 30, 40 buyers. And then, you got 15 to 20 traffickers out there. So these maybe 6 officers pull up and want to intervene. They're actually taking their lives and putting it in danger in the consideration that we can't fault them for being overwhelmed in that type of situation. It is truly astounding at the magnitude of what is still one of the most active tracks in California.
Well, I think it's also made even more complicated by the fact that you may have committed law enforcement that want to go out there and do the right thing, but you have prosecutors who are, and I know this was true for a while. I don't know if it's currently still the case, but you have DAs in LA that are saying, well, I'm not going to prosecute any of these cases. So even if we arrested a buyer, right, nothing's going to happen. So there's no incentive for police to do any kind of intervention if they know that all their work is just going to kind of go right out the window. Did you, during that Super Bowl, those events, did you have any opportunity to interact directly with buyers?
Yes, we actually interacted with 2 buyers.
Tell us about that.
And one was unique because we set up an operation and we actually had him meet us at a hotel. And we met in the lobby, and he got a little skittish. We thought for sure we was going to be able to have a conversation with him, but he got nervous and pretended he was going to the bathroom. And our observation team, I was actually on the observation team, we actually watched him walk into the bathroom, out of the bathroom, and went out the side door of the hotel lobby. He didn't even come back to the lobby area where we were actually sitting, and he had met us. Wow.
So you guys had posted an ad and intercepted him attempting to buy sex.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that was one. You said there were 2.
That was one. But the second one was interesting. The second one, I was actually partnered with another city leader out of Texas. And we actually had the opportunity to interact with a buyer. And one of our discussions that we had prior to making contact with him was, how was we going to do this? Because it had never been done it was definitely my first. And I believe
it's not very common still. Yeah.
Yes.
And to be clear, you guys are not cops. So you're not. So this
we're
is not
just ordinary citizens.
It's not a police activity.
No. And that what was unique about it is how are we going to approach this guy? So it was funny because he come in the lobby and we seen him before he seen us. And we're having a conversation, the other city leader and myself, and we're kind of strategizing how we're going to approach him. Because he was just a regular guy, normal. He didn't look creepy. He
wasn't wearing a trench coat?
No, he actually had on a polo shirt and some shorts. I mean, he was an Uber driver. It was just an ordinary guy. And so
how did that go down?
So we approached him and we basically introduced ourselves, and we did make him comfortable by enlightening him that we were not law enforcement. We were not even affiliated with law enforcement, and law enforcement wasn't going to come and put him in handcuffs at the end of our conversation.
Yeah.
So that really kind of set him at ease. And with the way we talked about how we wanted to have this conversation with him, we were actually striving, and we told him, we just want to know what actually got you to answer the ad today. Why today? What is actually going on that you want to purchase someone? And then understand, we're trying to understand why, really the why.
What did he say?
He actually had a unique answer. He wasn't looking for sex. He was looking for just companionship. I mean, this was a guy who had a family. I mean, he was married, he had kids. So we asked him, what would his family think about that? And how often had he been doing this? And this was something that he was frequently doing. I mean, it was a weekly event for him. But we kind of, I would say, threw him off by wanting just to have a conversation and find out why he was doing this, what was going on in his life that got him to this point that it was okay to purchase a human being.
How did the encounter end?
So he shared with us that even though he has a family, he has kids and he has a wife, he didn't feel loved. He was very lonely. And so we asked, what kind of got you to that point? And he was sharing with us that he just didn't feel that his wife loved him anymore. He was working hard, so he wasn't really spending time with his kids. So that was very unusual to have that type of conversation.
Yeah.
But he was really appreciative at the end that we were there and we wanted to know why he was doing this. He actually said that we saved him from doing something that he knew was wrong first, and a part of him really didn't want to do.
Yeah. I've heard that ending many times in these stories about buyers. I think it's such a powerful thing that, like with that guy, it was loneliness that drove him to take that risk. And he was met with a community of men who, it's a crazy irony that you guys showed up with an answer to his loneliness that didn't result in exploiting another person, but you guys showed up as healthy men to say, hey, let's talk. You created space for that. That's such a powerful example of what I believe is work that is unique for men to do in this space, is to show up in other men's lives as healthy men. So you did this in conjunction with the Super Bowl, but you've been doing it a lot longer than that and many more times since as a city leader in our Cyber Patrol program. What was that first experience like? We had David Bennett from Kansas City on a few weeks ago, and I asked him the same question, but for those that are maybe new on this episode, the Cyber Patrol is a virtual neighborhood watch type of a program that we've been running now for 11 years, where our teams, people like Isaac and the guys that he leads, regularly are online. They post fake ads selling sex, and Isaac answers. Do you remember what that first experience was like for you when a caller was calling in or texting in? Like, what was that like for you?
Ooh, that first one was rough.
For you or for him? Or both?
I think maybe for both. The first time I had a conversation with a buyer, in my mind, I thought, I can talk. Because I kind of pride myself on being able to talk to anybody.
Yeah.
But that was fastly proven wrong. I actually got a little choked up. I fumbled over my words, and it was hard. I mean, it was one of the hardest conversations. I equate that to actually standing there with your wife after you've watched her walk down the aisle, and you're sweating bullets as the pastor or whoever is reading the wedding beginning before the vows, and you're standing and you're sweating bullets. It was the same way. I mean, I knew I needed to have this conversation, but how to get it started was the hard part.
Was the buyer combative at all, or was he kind of freaked out? What was his attitude?
At first, he was combative, but then he didn't know how to. He wanted to stay on the line, but he didn't know how to hang up, which was, I would have actually probably preferred he would just hang up, because as he didn't hang up, and I continued to share the reality of what the victims are going through, then he became combative because that wasn't who he was. He wasn't someone that beats up victims. He was he was not the person that go out and look for young victims, underage victims. And I just listened to him, and then I was like, okay, I get that. I understand where you're coming from. But the reality is these victims start off in this life young. They start off as underage. Even when you meet them, they may be of age. They may be over 18. But let's put that into perspective. So you meet someone, she's 21 legally, but that means she's probably been in this life for almost a decade. Every single night, answering guys' calls, texts like you. Think about that.
What did he say?
I'm not that type of guy. I'm not that guy. I'm not a bad guy. And I agreed. I mean, I said, you're not a bad guy. I said, but the reality is we are contributing to them having to put on this act every single day, multiple times a day. That's what kind of threw him off, because I said we.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, that's so powerful right there, that little word, because you included yourself. You weren't saying he's one of the bad guys. You're saying we're all complicit, right? I mean, to one degree or another.
Yes.
So do you have any idea? I should have checked before we started the conversation, because I probably could figure it out. But do you have an idea how many patrols you have been a part of now over the years? It's got to be dozens.
Oh, yeah. I can't even count them up.
Yeah.
Right now, because we started with 2 here.
Yeah.
In Orange County, and it's grown. And I've made sure I've went to all of them.
So you've seen this repeated over and over again. Again, for people maybe new, a patrol is a 2 to maybe 4 hour session.
Yes.
Right. Mm-hmm. Where a team of men are gathered in a secure location, engaging with buyers in the way that Isaac is talking about. So, so you've been in the trenches on this for a long time. Is there an experience that haunts you that you've had with a buyer?
One experience, and I share this with all my teams, every new team I start, I had a call. I was with one of my teams, and it was a Tuesday night. It was a Wednesday night. Guy calls in, and at first he was combative. I mean, right out of the gate. But is there something, I need to share something with you. I need to tell you about the victim. And I need to tell you about this life that she's stuck in, basically. And he was willing to listen to that. So after sharing the truth about human trafficking and the truth about sex trafficking and what these victims go through, I asked him, I said, so can you tell me now what in your life has got you to this point, to where you answered this ad tonight? And he shared with me that he had lost his wife, he had lost his mother, he had lost a brother. All of this within a matter of 12 months. Wow. He had only had his dad and his other brother left. And his dad was ill. And he was kind of beating himself up because he knew it wasn't going to be long before his dad passed away. And he was trying to numb himself to the reality of interacting with people on a normal basis, having normal conversations, as he would put it. He just wanted to have a transaction.
Yeah.
He didn't want love. He didn't want no kind of comfort. He just wanted a transaction.
Do you think that was to just numb the loneliness that he was feeling?
Yes. Yeah. That's exactly what he expressed.
Yeah.
It was so intense that him and I both were crying.
Wow.
I had a chance to pray with him that night, and even now it brings tears to my eyes, because that was such a powerful moment where God interceded.
Yeah.
And he showed up, and this guy was really grateful at the end what we was doing. He understood. He actually accepted resources. We looked up a couple places that he could get into recovery and get some help, some therapy. But yeah, that one there is one I will always remember.
Yeah. Yeah.
We cried for a good 10 minutes together on the phone.
Wow. That is legitimately haunting.
We'll be right back after these messages. Did you know we have a new show? Join us in listening to Shop Talk, an extension of the Masculine Wilderness podcast, where your host, Tom Perez, and me, your producer, Lauren Trantham, get together to talk about the behind-the-scenes action that goes on within the anti-trafficking movement, current events, and epic news. It's free to subscribe. Just head on over to our website at epicproject.org and sign up for our newsletter, and you will be automatically opted in to receive these private episodes. See you at Shop Talk. And now, back to the show.
I think what's so powerful is you have lonely men being met by healthy men in such a unique setting, and it's such a powerful thing. Now, we don't know. I mean, I'm assuming you never heard back from him. Most of the time, we don't know what happens after those encounters, but I got to believe that guy felt a little less lonely that night after he got done talking to you.
Yeah, I believe that his life was transformed and touched. And what made that night unique is I was with a brand new team that I just started. So they hadn't seen me interact with a buyer.
Isaac shows up and starts crying on the phone.
Yeah, that was one. They was like, whoa, what is going on here? This is the guy that's leading us, and he's over here having first combative conversation with a guy who is just really not trying to hear him. And now all of a sudden he comes from the room and he's crying.
What? Tell me about, you're engaging with men that are trying to buy sex, and you're also recruiting and training and supporting other men who are trying to do what you're doing. Tell me about your teams. Tell me about your guys. Who are they? Where do they come from?
Oh, my guys are from every walk of life. I mean, I have a COO of a company, 2 school teachers, ex-firefighter who had to come out of retirement just recently, a lot of businessmen. I actually got a mechanic that owns his own business. I have a golf pro, amateur, and a pastor, a youth pastor that runs a youth ministry with his wife. It's just, it's humbling to see the diversity of all my teams, because I have like a group of young guys who all went to school together. I have some retired guys who've grown up and they've done ministry together. I have another team who they're all best friends. They've gone to church. They're like in the middle of life with their kids, growing and getting into activities. I have brand new dads.
Everything.
Who all had kids like within months of each other. Yeah, one of my teams called. One dad said, "Oh yeah, we're pregnant," and then 2 other guys is like, "Oh yeah, we're pregnant too." I was like, "Oh, wait a minute, are y'all drinking the same water? What is really going on here?"
I love that. I love the diversity. Yeah, kind of the all walks of life. What strikes me about hearing you describe them is it's a cross section. The men that are involved in this work with you down in Southern California, it's a cross section of the men from those communities, right?
Yes.
And the same thing is true, and I know this just like from a national perspective, the same thing is true of the buyers. They are a cross section of men in any given community. And I've seen data to support that. It's like the thing I've said, it's like people want to know, well, who are these buyers? And we think they're like the creepy guy in the trench coat out behind the grade school, but it's the guy in the polo shirt walking in the hotel lobby in LA. It's pastors, it's firefighters, it's business owners. And so my point there is like, there's no one better to engage these guys than other guys who come from the same place that they come from. And it's a powerful thing. What has been in terms of, because you're such a recruiter and such a leader, what are the highlights of that experience for you just in terms of leading and supporting men, like your guys, your teams? And these teams, they started in Orange County. Yeah. to LA County to Ventura County. So this has really grown. And Riverside County. Yeah. I mean, and those aren't small counties. You know, a lot of people there, but like what, from a leadership standpoint, what are the highlights for you? Because you're doing this as a volunteer. What are the highlights for you in terms of recruiting and leading and supporting men like this?
I will say the highlights are actually seeing guys that are willing to step out of their comfort zone. One of the conversations that I start when I do a presentation or I meet a group of guys who may be interested in wanting to get involved in anti-human trafficking work, I always tell them, well, what we do, you have to have one of the hardest conversations that you've never had in your life. Because we as guys can talk about a lot of things, but there's one conversation we are very taboo about and we shy away from. And that's the conversation about sex. And that's the true conversation about actually what happens to the victims on the street, what happens to the victims in these clubs, what happens to the victims in the massage parlors. We don't have those conversations. We joke about the visitation of those locations, but we don't actually get down to, do you truly understand what she has to go through to please you? We don't have that conversation. So to see guys that are willing to listen to that spiel and still be on fire and want to join, that's the highlight to me. And to see them night in, month in, dedicated to want to have patrol, to spend 3 hours away from their families, to have these kind of conversations. And then at the end of the night, be okay with, hey, we only had one guy that we connected with tonight. Or, well, we really didn't connect in a conversation, but we had some good texts. To really feel that. And like I tell my guys, if we can pray with one person or if we can offer resources to just one guy, we've done what we've been called to do. Because we don't understand what that ripple effect is going to be. Or we don't know how that pebble is going to be used. But I truly believe it's going to be used because I was called to go save his sons. There's many organizations that are saving the children, that are saving the ladies, that are saving his girls, but there's not many organizations that are willing to save his sons and make that a priority. And to me, that's what ending demand is going out here and saving his sons, saving the buyers, not shaming them. I mean, we can arrest them all day.
Every day,
but are we really making an impact on their lives?
Yeah. That's so keenly put. And I actually had never heard it kind of phrased that way. It's, and you don't know that. I think that's the other thing that makes it hard. We don't really know which ones we're actually saving. I mean, that's, and maybe it's just hard to know, but I think the power of what you do, the power of the teams that you've built is that you have, it's ironic actually, you kind of have this special forces cadre of guys right now doing some pretty high level stuff. I know you didn't want to go into special forces earlier in your career, but here you are. And it's, every metaphor breaks down, so I'm not going to push this too far out of respect for what I know special forces people really do. But it takes a high degree of discipline, and there's a high level of skill and training and all of that you bring to this. I want to ask you a question. If you had, knowing what you know of Southern California, let's go from Riverside County to Ventura County. If you had 500 guys trained like the teams you have now, is there enough work for them to do?
Yes.
Why do you say that? What do you see that makes you confident that you could keep 500 guys busy in this work just in Southern California?
Because the reality that I see as I teach the awareness of human trafficking, and to see that people are still in denial that this is happening, what gives me that confidence. And to see that there is still not only work that we do on the patrols, but as the guys go back to their families and go back to their lives the next day, they have confidence that now they can talk to other guys. They can have now that tough conversation with friends or with family members like me and my brother. You know, he's a mid-40s single guy, but I have this conversation with him a lot. And sometimes he wants to hear it, and sometimes he doesn't.
But you're saying if a man can be trained to have that kind of difficult conversation with a buyer, with someone who's actively trying to exploit someone, if we can have that conversation, it's relatively easy to turn around and have that conversation with your little brother or your neighbor down the street. There's a kind of authority that comes from having had the experience that you've had.
Right. And they can look at their network. So you take those 500 guys, and then if you look at their average network, so when you're talking guys, most guys average anywhere from 3 to 7 close guys that they know they can have a conversation with. So as you do that math, now those 7...
Exponential.
Yes. So as you have this conversation with the initial 7, 3 to 7, and now they're going to go tell, hey, you got to hear what Isaac just told me. You're not going to believe what's happening in Southern California, what's happening here in Orange County or LA County. Let's talk about this. And now we got everybody talking. If I got you talking, I got you thinking.
You're right.
And now you're aware, as I tell guys, once you hear what we got to say, you're aware. The question is, are you going to continue to sit on the couch and watch that football game? Or are you going to get into action and do something about it? Because I'm only asking you for 12 days a year.
Well, I think the other part of it is it doesn't necessarily mean that they would have to join a patrol. But like you said, if you got them talking, you got them thinking, there may be other ways that we haven't even discovered yet for men to be proactively, whether like further upstream. Like what if the guy you're talking to is a youth soccer coach and he's got 29-year-old boys that he's with every week, and he's in a position of influence, and we can inspire him to use his influence there. I love that. If we got him talking, we got him thinking. I'd like to believe that's what you and I are doing right now. I hope we're talking, and I hope people are thinking. I hope men are thinking. I want to give you kind of the last word here, but I will set it up just a little bit. Maybe put your Sergeant Jones hat on. So here's the scene. Your boys are home for Christmas, let's say, and they're sitting in your kitchen and they're thinking about what's going on in the world. And you said one just turned 30, and how's the youngest one? 18. So 18. They're still both, even though they're separated by a decade or more, they're still both at that. I can remember in that season of life going, what kind of impact am I going to have on the world? So let's assume that your sons are thinking about that. This may be, knowing you, this is maybe a conversation you've already had, but what is your charge to them as young men who have influence in this world? What do you say to them to really just drive that home?
Just encourage them to choose things in their life that make a difference. I always remember the motto, and it goes back to Charles Barkley and being a role model. I tell my boys, unfortunately, everyone is a role model. There are going to be kids that are going to look up to you. There are going to be kids that are just going to look at you. So keep that in mind. As you now go transitioning into your careers, you're transitioning into your family, you've got to understand that now there's going to be young people that are looking at you. And they're looking at you and kind of modeling what they see, not really listening to what they hear. What's coming out your mouth is not really going to translate in this generation. This next generation is all about what they see with their eyes, because they can't trust, or they don't want to trust, what they hear with their ears. So their eyes tell them practically everything. So always keep that in mind. There's a video camera everywhere. Just make sure that you're doing the right thing for the right reasons, and don't worry about what people say, because there's going to be people that's not going to like what you're doing. There's going to be people that's not going to like you, period, for who you are, or what your dad or what your mom did. You've got to be okay with that. And I can tell you, your dad is making a lot of folks not really happy being involved in this movement. But at the end of my life, I'm going to be fine because I made a difference. And that's really the goal, is to make a difference.
You are doing that, Isaac McKeithen. You're a blessing to us, to Epic, to me. I'm so grateful for being in the trenches with you. You're a running back. I'm a center. It's no wonder we connect. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll run behind you every day.
All day, every day. Thanks, man. It's so good to talk to you. I appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for listening to the Masculine Wilderness Podcast with your host, Tom Perez. This podcast is a production of Epic Project, a nonprofit organization dedicated to disrupting the demand for commercial sexual exploitation and dismantling the forces that perpetuate it. I'm your producer, Lauren Trantham. Special shout out to our favorite logo designer, Michelle Boucher, as well as Wes Finley, who crafted and donated our amazing theme song. Interested in sponsoring an episode? Send us an email at podcast@epicproject.org. That's podcast@epikproject.org. As a nonprofit organization, your donations allow us not only to produce this podcast and change the conversation around sexual exploitation, but also to manage our many programs, such as buyer intervention, teen prevention, and community education. Your support also allows us to support survivors of exploitation and more. To learn more about our work and to donate, visit www.epicproject.org. Once again, that is www.epikproject.org. Most importantly, this podcast would be nothing without you, the listener. Thank you for tuning in, subscribing, and sharing this episode with your friends and loved ones. Thank you for your commitment to learning more about the issues that affect our most vulnerable populations. Thank you for navigating this masculine wilderness with us. See you next episode.